Okay, my name is Sam Silberberg. I was born August 25th, 1929, in a small town in Poland called Jaworzno.
Can you spell that?
Jaworzno, Jaworzno. The Jews constituted about 5% of the population. We had an extended family of 108 people, of which only about 4 people survived the Holocaust. I went, as a child, I went to school and to Cheder. When I was 3 years old, I was going to Cheder, which is a Hebrew school, and I studied how to pray and how to read the prayer books because my family was very Orthodox. We were a family of 4 children, 3 brothers and a sister. And when I went to school, to public school in the morning, from about 8:30 till 1 o'clock, and then in the afternoon, I had to go to Hebrew school, which is called Cheder, from 1 o'clock till about 5 o'clock with a short lunch break. It was really very hard to live with such amount of tension and duty because I had no time to play. And I didn't realize it until later that I was missing because I had to do so much hard work. However, I was very affected by the anti-Semitism that persisted in the public school because Poland is 99% Catholic, and in school we were just a few Jewish kids, and we were prejudiced against. We were called Christ killers, etc. And finally, this is not enough, but what the kids, the Polish kids did, they would start fights and beat up on the Jewish kids. So I finally organized the Jewish kids so that they can meet in my house, because it was on the same street where the school was, and would go as a group to the school so that we could resist any kind of threatening attacks by the Polish kids. And as a matter of fact, the Polish kids called me Groźny Żydek because I didn't take any crap from them, so they called me the fearless Jew, and I didn't care. So that, but the anti-Semitism persisted. I remember an incident where during the school break, they decided, you're such a fearless Jew, let me see if you fight this kid, this Polish guy, to see who wins. So I said, okay, we'll do it. So I went ahead, we had this fight during the break, and I said one thing during the fight: don't get involved, just me and him. However, when we had the fight, I managed to get on top of him, so the other Polish kids started kicking me in all this. So I went and I bit off almost half an ear of this Polish kid. And when I saw the blood vanish, I ran away. I didn't want to go to my father because I didn't know what the hell to say. So I ran away and I skipped school for about 3 days. Finally, the teacher who was a client of ours from our store. We had a store of uniforms and stuff like this, clothing for men and boys. So the teacher came in to my father and said to him, "How come I'm not going to school?" She told him what happened. So when I came back from Cheder, from Hebrew school, my father calls me and says, "Come here, Boychik. I want to talk to you." He says, "What happened? What did you do?" He says, "Look, we had this fight. This is what happened." I told him exactly what happened. And I bit his ear up, so I was afraid of the consequences. I ran away. So my father told me, "Look, when you fight for what is right, you can always come to me and talk to me. You don't have to be afraid of what's going on. You did the right thing, go away, but next time when something like this happened, talk to me. Don't worry about it. And don't worry about it if you complain when you ask me about why they call me Christ killer and all this, and I explained to you that Christ was killed over 2,000 years ago, and I said to my father, then why do they bother us now? My father said, look, they don't know any better. This is the kind of education they get from the church and from their parents at home. So that's what it is. Now, that's the kind of life we lived in Poland, because on my father's side, they were 9 children.
What language did you speak at that time?
At home, we normally early I spoke Polish. My parents spoke Yiddish. I had a Polish nanny, so I didn't know Yiddish until later, because my parents used Yiddish so that we cannot understand what's going on. But when I went to Cheder, the rabbi taught me Yiddish, how to read and all this. So this is how I learned Yiddish. So we spoke Yiddish at home and Polish throughout. So those are the 2 languages we spoke. And my father, they were about 4 brothers in my father's home and 5 sisters. So my father had to go in their home. They had my grandfather, Abraham Silberberg, was a very religious man, had 9 children, of course, and he also, because he served in the Austrian army, so he had special permission to own a printing plant. So we had a printing plant. My father used to go in the evenings to help out in the printing plant, so that they make enough money for dowry for the daughters when they get married off. That was the custom at the time. And that's everything went pretty well, because we were well-to-do. We also had an interest in a bus company that was traveling between Krakow and Katowice, Poland, through the little towns and so on. So everything was fine and dandy until after, in 1937, my grandmother died, my grandfather's wife, and my grandfather, because he's religious, he wanted to die in Jerusalem. So he decided in 1938 to go and live in Jerusalem. So there was a big bon voyage party in about November of 1938 when he left to go to Jerusalem. And I remember that bon voyage party, a bunch of young men were standing and were very serious they had a serious discussion about something, And they were wondering and I was wondering why they are so concerned about. So my uncle Moses realized I'm so curious, so he went and explained it to me. He said, the reason they are so serious and concerned is because of the situation that is taking place in Germany. Nazi goons, this was known as Kristallnacht. Nazi goons attacked Jewish synagogues and killed some Jews, and also smashed Jewish residences and destroyed Jewish businesses, etc. And they said the clouds of war are imminent because the Nazis occupied parts of Germany, Sudetenland, under the auspices that those are German-speaking people and so on. And sure enough, in September 1 of 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland. But my uncle at the time told me, remember, they called me Schmilek. My nickname was Schmilek. He says, remember, God forbid something happened, you are left alone, you got to do something. You go through Europe to Turkey, from there to Syria, and into Palestine. This is where the National Jewish Home is going to be. That sparked in me the first desire and understanding of Zionism and the longing for Zion. This opened a total different venue in my mind. I figured this would be the way we escape the burdens of anti-Semitism and live in an independent Jewish state. It was this feeling that gave a lot of impetus to my thinking and desires as time went on. It gave me an area of hope. It imbued me with the desire to join and not succumb to anti-Semitism. As soon as the Nazis came into Poland, marched into Poland on September 1, they took various Jewish men.
Year?
Pardon me?
That was what year?
In September 1, 1939.
Yes, 1939.
They took my uncle in an adjacent town called Trzebina, Trzebina, as hostage in case something happens to a Nazi soldier. Sure enough, one of the soldiers was killed by a Pole, and they executed my uncle. Subsequently, they took my father as hostage. So the family had to call all their resources in order to bribe certain authorities, so he is released. And when my father was released, he was unrecognizable. They cut his beard off, they purged him, and really, really punished him, but he survived. He came home, and once they were there, once again, the Nazis issued edicts restricting Jewish behavior and Jewish movement in town by notifying on billboards of the town restrictions. Every day they had new restrictions imposed upon the Jews. Jewish children couldn't go to school. Jews had to wear the yellow Star of David on their arm, as well as on their left chest. Jews couldn't own businesses, and Jewish businesses were taken over by a Gauleiter, so that our business was also taken over by a Gauleiter, but since they didn't know anything how to manage the business, so they forced my father to manage the business for them at a meager salary, if any, because they didn't know how to run it. However, the children were going to school. In order to go, since they couldn't attend public school, so the Jewish community and different members of the community instituted clandestinely schools within different residences for different age levels of children, and it was incumbent upon me to take my younger sister and younger brother to different schools, and I had to make sure that they're not caught in raids, because by that time the Nazis had raided to take Jewish able-bodied men into labor camp, and people that didn't qualify for labor camp, they would send to the extermination camp. So I had to learn how to be smart enough to avoid being caught by the Nazis. After a while, the Nazis decided to make the town what they called Judenfrei, cleansed of Jews. So we went from Yavozhno to a different town called Kshanow, Chrzanow, where a aunt of mine lived, whose husband also was shot by the Germans, and we lived there now together with that aunt. Again, that town, after a short period of time, was declared by the Germans to be Judenrein, and we had to move from there to a town called Sosnowiec, which Sosnowiec, Sosnowiec. That town was a larger town. It had a streetcar. It wasn't a streetcar named Desire, you can be assured of that. But it was a streetcar. It was something that I was not used to it. And by that time, our income was shrunk to almost nothing. My older brother was caught in one of the raids and was in a labor camp. So it was incumbent upon me to help to make some money. I was only about 11 years old, so I decided I will smuggle stuff between the Jewish community and the Polish non-farming community, because the Jewish community had a lot of craftsmen, which is shoemakers and tailors and so on. So the Polish community needed finished products, shoes and suits and so on, and dresses, whereas provisions and food products in the Jewish community were in short supply. But I didn't know how to trade, so my father said to me, listen, it's very simple, he says. You buy something for 5 zloty. Zloty is the Polish money. For 5 zloty, you sell it for 7. So it's simple. You buy it, you buy a suit for 10 zloty, you sell it for 15 zloty on the other side, and then you buy on the other side bread, you buy vegetables, you buy provisions. Again, you mark it up and you sell it, so you make a profit both ways and so on. So finally I went, but when I went, I was afraid that I would be detected by the Nazis, and especially I would be handed over to Nazis by the Polish anti-Semites. So I was really, lots of times I had very, very threatening moments where I was afraid I would be given away.
Did you have to wear the star on your arm or your?
No, I couldn't. I couldn't do this. I couldn't go on. I had to go as a I had gone not as a Jewish boy, but as I tried to go get passed by as a Polish boy, and because I had this Polish student cap and all that. So but the Poles sometimes knew the difference, and I was afraid I would be discovered, or they would hand me over. In any case, I went and I managed to do it. After a while, they decided to liquidate the Jewish community in Sosnowiec and send them all over in all the Jewish communities in the area, including Benjin, Bendzin, and the surrounding villages, and concentrate them in a ghetto called Schroedula. So in Schroedula, there were about 35,000 Jews from the entire area concentrated. We were lucky to get an apartment on the basement floor, which was on the bottom. Now,
was your family together at that time?
Yeah, our family was together. My father, my two brothers, and my sister. My older brother by that time was taken to a labor camp, a concentration camp. We didn't know where.
But did you have to wear a star at that?
I didn't. I tried.
You didn't.
Since I was impersonating a Polish student with Polish appearance, because as a Jew, I couldn't travel in the public transportation. So in order for me to be able to travel public transportation, I had to impersonate a Polish student. By doing so, I was risking being discovered by other Polish people and handed over to the Germans. So there were times where I was literally making in my pants from fear that I'd be caught.
Sure.
And however, it worked very well. The ghetto was surrounded by a barbed wire, and the Jewish Judenrat, the word Judenrat, which spells Judenrat, Judenrat, was actually collaborating with the Germans, supposedly implementing all the German orders and following their instructions and imposing heavy fees on people trying to go to and from the ghetto. So I couldn't afford to go out of the ghetto. Luckily, because we were in a downstairs basement apartment, which was close to the fields, which were full of bushes right near the fence, so we were able to create a hole where I would sneak through the hole into the bushes and outside to catch a trolley car, a streetcar, going to the city and to other places. I can do my trading. By that time, I was pretty well versed in doing it. But the Germans kept occasionally raiding the ghetto very frequently to get people to go into labor camp and extermination camp. We were fully aware by that time what was going on in Auschwitz, because we were not far from Auschwitz. Both my hometown Jaworzno and Sosnowiec. Jaworzno was about 15 miles out of Auschwitz. Sosnowiec was about 23 miles out of Auschwitz. So they were all about... So we were aware of what was going on. As a matter of fact, when we were still in Jaworzno, the Germans were transporting trains which were laden with people from all over Europe. In those trains, the traffic to Auschwitz was so great that they couldn't consume all these bodies at the rate they were delivering them, so they sidetracked the train. I remember my parents sent me with some food to give to the people in the trains when I was about 10 and a half years. When we were still in Jaworzno, I was 10 and a half years old. I remember going down to the railroad station tracks, and when I saw the trains in the bushes, and as I got nearer there, I could hear their cries and even smell their excrements. And I tried to throw food through the outstretched arms through the cattle car trains in which were transported. My aim was not good in the beginning, but as time went on, I got better at it, and I was able to get them the food. But again, I was afraid, because if the guards, SS guards, would catch me, they would take me right in with them. And when I came home, I didn't want to tell my parents of the danger of the stuff I'm doing, because I was afraid they will forbid me to do it, and I just enjoyed doing it. I wanted to help those people. But in the ghetto, we built a hideout. We called it a bunker. In Yiddish, called a bunker. A bunker to hide. So my father, who was very handy, separated a room, put a false wall up, and built a stove with a baking compartment, which had the baking compartment was used as an entryway into the bunker when the Germans were raiding town. So in August of 1943, we saw the German, beginning of August was, I think, the 1st of August. We saw the Germans surrounding the entire ghetto and we knew that there's something that gone. And originally we thought it's going to be a raid, but we saw all these trucks with German jeeps and all that surrounding the ghetto. We knew something fierce is going on, and we all went into this bunker, which was designed to hold 14 people, but in this particular occasion there were 23. And as we were in that bunker, which was again in the basement floor of the building, we could hear we could feel the German trucks on top and hear the loudspeakers announcing that everyone has to go to the segregation place, to the Appellplatz, which is a public square where they conduct the segregation. And we hope that we can survive it. And as we were there, we heard steps on the apartment above, the Germans going in, and we heard steps. And while we heard those steps, thump, bump, because you could hear the Germans in their boots, one of the women in the bunker that had a baby, the baby started crying. And we were all afraid, of course, we were going to be found out about. So the woman went and took a pillow over the baby to stop it from crying, but it was too late. In the meantime, the Germans went and took axes and opened the floor above us and told us to go and join the march to the segregation place. But as we started, once they left, the woman realized that she choked the baby.
The baby died.
The baby died.
Oh.
And she was crying. She had a double guilt. You could feel on her face the desperation and pain, because not only did her baby's cries develop the hideout, but her baby died all at the same time. So it was an awful feeling. So in the meantime, we got our things together to join the march. Now, when you went out, we went up to the street to go towards the segregation place. You could see the people marching with their belongings in this. It just was literally like a funeral march, except one thing, that you knew the people were walking to their own funeral. That was the feeling. I was by that time.
Were they carrying their personal belongings?
Pardon me?
What were they carrying?
They were carrying their personal belongings. They were under
They had hope.
They were under the impression they were going to be resettled. They were hopes that they were going to survive the war and all this,
yes.
But they didn't know where it's going. So at that time, my sister was in the hospital with gangrene. And because we knew that they were going to amputate her leg, because my father took me and my younger brother in, my father and mother, to promise that if we survived the war, that we would support the sister when she survives the war as an invalid and so on. It was just a gruesome existence.
Let's back up for a minute. Where was your mother's family at this time?
Pardon me?
Where was your mother's family at this time?
My mother's family consisted of a sister and who died by that time, but her kids and husband were also were killed, were in Belgium, and they were taken to they were killed, they were taken to Auschwitz,
Okay.
and they were exterminated. That now, when going to that, on the way to the assembly place where they do the segregations, my father and mother decided to split up, where my mother would take my youngest brother and I would go with my father. So as we came into that segregation place, I heard all the cries. It was just an awful, awful feeling of hell, because people were crying. Kids were taken away by the Germans from their mother's breast and thrown onto the pavement. Husbands were separated from their mothers. It was just an awful cry. And then, as we were separate. I didn't want to be a burden to my father, because I knew that I am destined to go to the extermination camp. And I didn't want him to be feeling guilty or be upset about it. So, as they selected him to go among able-bodied men to go to the labor camp, I realized that I got to do something. I wanted to join him without affecting his fate. So, as a couple, the German guards were selecting. There was a couple with kids in front of me, and as the assessment was busy because the kids started crying and the woman started carrying on when they separated them, I had the opportunity to join the unit. I snuck in to the unit where my father was. The problem was, when I snuck into the unit, is that I was not old enough to go to a labor camp. So what do? So luckily I went and found a cinder block someplace and went into the back row so the Germans won't see me, and I stood on top of a cinder block. So when they make
bigger, yeah.
when they make the selection, they don't realize that I am small. So I stood on top of a cinder block, and when the German made the selection, he came and asked my father, "Was machst du denn? What do you do?" So my father said, he is a mason. So they took him to the people that do the work for the work camp. So later on he asked me, "What do you do?" So I said, "I am a mason's helper." So he told me pointed me to go to the work camp too. You see, the Germans don't look down; they always look up. You know that. So luckily for me, he told me to go there. But I didn't dare to step down from the cinder block because I didn't want him to see how small I am. So I waited till he went a little further. Then I went to my father's unit. That's how I wound up with my father in concentration camp.
In the labor camp.
In the labor camp. So we went from there. They took us to a labor camp called Annaberg, where we were building barracks for future occupants, laborers,
Yeah.
and so on.
Where was your mother at that time?
My mother at that time was left behind in that.
Was there was like a line that goes to the right?
Yeah,
and a line
they segregated. There were ropes.
So You didn't know where your mother was.
I didn't at that time know. By the time, because when we were loaded on trucks, all I could hear is cries and agonizing cries of can you imagine 35,000 people standing there and being subjected to that kind of cruel punishment. It was just an awful, awful sight. So we didn't know what happened to my mother at that time. We were taken
Where
to
was your brother?
my younger brother was with my mother. My older brother was already in concentration camp.
Okay.
So we were transported to the... There's a lot more details, by the way, in the book, because I can't... It's hard to do it all in that short a period of time.
You can skip part of it.
So I'm skipping a great deal of stuff. We were in Annaberg. Again, it was my entire feeling, my entire being was... I was emotionally upset that the Jews go like sheep to the slaughterhouse without any kind of meaningful resistance. As a matter of fact, when this was, because this took place in August of 1943, in April of 1943 was the Jewish uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto, and I felt extremely proud that the Jews finally, and that too was conducted by people like Mordechai Anelevich, who was a Zionist, he decided, and I, with my religious upbringing, I always felt that we should emulate Samson, the hero in Jewish history, which was holding his hands on the temple of the Philistines. He says, "Let my soul perish with the Philistines." So if you're going to die, let some Germans die with you. I felt very strong about it, but I was too young to do anything about it. Anyhow, I went there. I was in camp. I was in Annaberg. We were about 3 months. We worked on...
How do you spell that?
Annaberg, Annaberg.
That's the way it sounds.
Annaberg. We were there about 3 months. We finished our work. They sent us to...
You were with your father?
With my father. Yeah. This was in a forest. You couldn't see. We had no contact with the world. We didn't know what was going on there. But when they shipped us from there to another concentration camp in Blechhammer, which is called Blechhammer, Blechhammer. And it's now a Polish town called Blachownia, Blachownia.
Good.
Blachownia. Because now it belongs to Poland. It was an industrial complex there. There were about 4,800 inmates in that Jewish inmates in concentration camp. I remember that as we were coming in to the gates of the camp, when they opened, we saw on the stage the orchestra playing. I was thinking, what is this? And we were assigned to a barrack, the barrack number 15. in the back of the barrack there was a crematorium. And me being so young, we were given the striped uniforms and all that. And I being so young, I remember I didn't have a uniform that fits me. I had to roll it up to make sure that they don't notice. As a matter of fact, we were assigned to different labor camps. I was assigned to a group, and my father was assigned to a different group. He would only meet at night when we came back home. They would shackle us on the way to the industrial complex, but the difference being between this camp and Annaberg is because in this industrial complex they had a multitude of different nationalities enslaved, working for the German cause, for the German industry. They were prisoners of war. There were English prisoners of war, French prisoners of war, Russian prisoners of war. We had contact with. We were not allowed to have contact with, but of course we did maintain contact. So because the British prisoners of war had clandestine radio contact with London, and they knew what's going on in the war. This is when we first found out about the invasion of Normandy and all in the advance of the Russian and all this. So we finally had some hope that we would survive the war. In any case, I was very, very energetic, and I was very frustrated, and I wanted to escape. And my father always warned me, just remember, when you escape, you got to know where you're going, what you're going to do. Because once you escape, you're going to get caught. They're going to kill you. Yeah. Here, you might have a chance to survive the war. I said to him, listen, if you're not going to venture, you're not going to do anything. Sure enough, as a matter of fact, what happened was, during one of the raids, you see, the Allied planes came by sometimes and bombed the industrial complex. So I decided, in the only way you could escape without ramifications to fellow prisoners, because if you escape, normally they would kill 10 other prisoners because of your escape. However, if the bomb falls and damage ensued, it's assumed that you are buried in the rubble and you didn't escape, so there was no ill effect for other prisoners. So I decided, one day there was an alarm, I decided I'm gonna escape. I managed to get out of the industrial complex. I was free as a bird. But the damn planes flew by without dropping any bombs. Oh. Now I was confronted with a dilemma. What do I do? Sure enough, this is a hell of a decision to have to make for a 14-year-old.
But your father was still on the other...
Pardon me?
Your father was still on the
My
other
father
side.
was still there. And so were other prisoners. Yeah. He says, now I got to go. So, of course, I had to go back. So I went back. And when I told my father about it, you see, you can't do things lightly. You got to plan it. It's got to be. I says, you can't. You got to do what you got to do. That was and I was very despondent in camp and very restless because I saw people dying of malnutrition and all this. And I said, what the hell? I may just well commit suicide. I work to the last minute, and then they kill me anyhow. So why do it? Why give him all that work? I commit suicide. So my father said, look, you got to be hopeful. You got to have hope. You got to have faith, because he was very religious. I said, faith? What faith? Look, you pray to God every time. The Nazis walk around with a belt, and on the belt it says, Gott ist mit uns, which means God is with us. You know, tell me, what sense does that make? Anyhow, so my father says, look, let me tell you a story. There were two flies that fell into cream. One of them was a believer and the other one a you are non-believers. I'll say one of them was an optimist, the other one was a pessimist. Both flies. The pessimist had no faith in himself, no faith in anything, fell in the cream and drowned. The optimist had a lot of faith in himself, started kicking the legs and flapping the wings back and forth until he made butter out of the cream and got out. So that was kind of helpful to me.
Story, yes.
It was a really story. At least it didn't consist of a fanatical religious belief.
Yes.
It was a practical advice, which I respected my father despite the differences, loved him very much. In any case, I listened to him, but the conditions in camp, nevertheless, were awful. People that were sick were immediately sent to the sanitarium, which was the sick bed, and if they didn't get back on their feet within 2 days, they poisoned them. They were sent right into the crematorium. And since we lived in the barrack next to the crematorium, you could smell when they burned the bodies, the smell of burning flesh. It was awful existence. Things were rationed. Luckily, we didn't smoke, so even the wood grain of smoke that they supplied as a ration, we could trade it in for sugar. This is how we were able to do a little better. And this went on. This was the end of 1943. In the beginning of 1944, like in January or so, as we were led back from the industrial complex to the concentration camp, which was about a few miles, we were always shackled. I was in the middle, and there were two guys. There were 5 in a row, and there were 2 guys on either side of me. As we are walking and threading in the snow, I see on the side a woman walking in the snow, threading in the snow. And as we got closer, I see a coat that I recognized as my mother's coat, because I didn't see her face. And then we go by. I see it's my mother, and I kind of nudged the guy next to me. I said, "This is my mother." He says to me, "Shut up, kid. If you're going to be too loud, the Nazis are going to take her in." And she managed to insert a piece of paper with contact information in the units where my father was. She hoped to be able to get together with my father and maybe have kids. That's a Yiddish mama for
Yep.
you.
Yes.
Anyhow,
Yes.
when we got back to the camp, that's how we know that my mother was alive. Because we didn't know anything about my mother since we parted in the assembly place there.
Yes.
It's obvious that my younger brother went into the extermination camp. That was obvious. So now we had a dilemma. How do we get in touch? And we used to get in touch with my mother. We couldn't get any contact. We tried with other people. It didn't quite work well, but they knew. So I told them, look, my boss, told my father, my boss is German, but he limps. He was injured in the Russian front, and he is not too fond of what's going on, from what I know. But I don't know if I can trust the German or not. And I discussed it with him. So finally my father said to me, you know what? Do you test him out? Tell him, do you have an aunt someplace that you would like him to get in touch with, and see what his response is going to be and how and so on. So if it's positive, let me know. So I did that. So I told him, he said he would visit her and all this. So he said to me, okay, because we used other people in camp that had contacts, but it didn't work out quite well.
Yeah.
You know, and we were afraid to get too many more people involved. So finally, I told him the information. My boss, he went to visit my mother. She was on Aryan papers. Her maiden name before she got married was Bela, Baila, Siegman, Siegman. It so happens because in the First World War, this was part of Austria, so she spoke a perfect German. So she went, not being a male who was circumcised, is subject to discovery, so she was able to get Aryan papers and work in a Catholic monastery that was an old age home for older people. So we were in contact, and he brought back packages and all this. So we were finally better off. But the situation in camp didn't improve any, but we were a little better off. Prisoners were dying left and right from malnutrition and everything else. And again, I argued with my father. He says, well, he said to me, he was right. He said to me, look, you were going to do all sorts of crazy things before. You knew that your mother's alive, and here your mother is alive and helping you. There's a chance we get together as a family after the war. I said to him, okay, you're right. So let me see what's what. Finally, in January of 1945, the exact date actually is January 21 of 1945. It was a Sunday.
You knew that the Germans were losing.
We knew that the Germans were losing. Not only did we know that the Germans were losing, we could hear artillery fights going on, because where we were, it was on the Oder River, which was Order, right near the Oder River. So the Russians were trying to cross the river, And the Germans had fortifications there. So we could hear the artillery, we knew. But they decided to evacuate the camp. This was a Sunday morning. We heard the loudspeakers coming in saying, we got to go on the assembly place. What I didn't tell you is that in Yom Kippur of 1944, after we came back from the Baustelle, from the industrial complex, I use the German word Baustelle because that's what I'm used to. But in the industrial complex where many people work for the German cause, they assembled all 4,800 prisoners on the Appellplatz, on the assembly place. They had built a gallows in which they, you could picture the gallows was erected on the left side. The entire 4,800 prisoners are lined up to watch. They did it. They made a spectacle out of it. It was late in the afternoon because after a day's work, the projectors in the watchtowers where the Nazis were, and the projectors were illuminating the gallows. They were reading the accusation of the 3 prisoners that they decided to execute by hanging. And it was one hook. You could see
One
3...
hook for each prisoner?
Pardon me?
One hook for each prisoner?
No.
Just
There was
hook.
one hook. There was one hook, and they hung all 3 prisoners with the nooses of all 3 prisoners on that hook. And as the prisoners were vibrating, struggling to die or whatever, the hook broke loose.
But 3 prisoners on one hook.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the hook broke loose. The picture, that was a moment for me. We thought, here it is. They were on the hook broke loose. So the people, they were condemned to death, but since the hook broke loose, according to the Geneva Convention, you can't kill him again. But they went and killed him again. They hung him again. They rehung him. What bothered me at that time was the silence of 4,800 prisoners. You think after this hook broke that there would be a mass thing to get those prisoners away from there. There wasn't one iota of move. That's how subjugated people were to die. I was angry. I was again. Here I am. I'm a kid, but I'm angry about that. And I spoke to my father about it afterwards. He said, people hope to survive. They can't risk their life. They know they're going to get shot to death. I said, so what? So that's where does Samson come in? You die, but you die at least.
Fighting,
Take a few Germans with you. That was my attitude. Anyhow, during that, again, it was known as the Death March. The on the 21st of January, they took away the prisoners. They led them through various villages overnight. And this all while, at that time, I managed to have, because on the industrial complex we had contact with French and other prisoners of war, I managed to have leather shoes for me and my father and some woolen sweater that we could hide under the prisoner's uniform. Otherwise, because if they know you had that, they would kill you for it. In any case, that death march, and the reason it's called death march is because they marched the people for as long as they could, and come the evening, they would take them off the main road into a village and shove them into barns which were abandoned, hay barns, which feeds the cattle. And that created a stampede because the Nazis, with dogs behind and whips, were whipping the prisoners into the barn. And that created a stampede where prisoners were stepping over each other and killing us soon.
Yeah.
And during that death march, they didn't feed us at all. We lived on snow. We melted on our steel canteens. And we kept, and that was going on, and people died. It got to be so that even the blanket I was carrying, I could drop off in the morning because I was too weak to walk with it. But I could count towards the evening that I could pick up a blanket for some corpse, from somebody that died. And we marched like this. This was a Sunday night. This was Monday, Tuesday.
And you were with your father?
Pardon me? I was with my father. And I decided, I said to my father, look, why don't we bury ourselves in hay and wait till the war is over or something? He said, okay, we'll do it next time. Come Wednesday, we march to a place, we march on the street, and in a crossroad, I see a sign that says Neisse Neustadt, 24 Kilometer, which means Neisse, Neisse. That's the name also of a river. That's where my mother was in a convent. I said to my father, look, now is a good time for us to escape. We go to my mother. He says, we'll do it. We'll do in the hay. Wednesday night, by the time we go, they drive us into the barns. We are exhausted. We just fall asleep and drop dead just about. So anyhow, that following morning, Thursday morning, they wake us up before dawn to get out. You could see the projectors and things. Again, we go out. So we said we do it Friday night. The same thing happens Friday morning. They get us out. So as we go out Friday morning, now that's already the 26th of January.
Bitter
Now,
cold.
pardon me?
Bitter cold.
Yeah, but again, you go out, you fill your canister up with snow so it melts on your body so you have some water to drink. That's what the only thing that kept us alive.
You're
So
lucky you had a canister.
no, they gave us, we all had canisters. That was part of the supply. The canister and a blanket.
Wow.
They didn't feed us, so the canister was in vain, but it was useful to melt the snow.
Yeah.
So and as they lead us out of the village into the main road, they stop us on the main road because there is a contingent of French prisoners of war walking by. It's to allow them to walk by. Also, a lot of Germans at that time were walking by. And we could hear the Soviet Stukas attacking the German military convoys and artillery. We knew everything was going on. And so while they stopped us on that curb, near that intersection, my father, who is religious, decided to say in a minion, he had that there was a bunch of Jews around, and since it was the death anniversary of my grandfather, who died in Jerusalem, so he decided that he uses this pause to say Kaddish. As he was saying the Kaddish, I see the German soldier turning his back to us, looking into his sled, into his belongings or something, while he was waiting. As he was saying Kaddish, I drop off my striped suit and I tap him on the shoulder and I say, Tata, gay, Dad, I'm going. And I went. There were a bunch of German kids watching, and I said in German, you lousy Jew bastards, and so on. And I went because I had that French prisoner of war and that French woolen head, because otherwise they would see my shaved head.
Yeah.
Okay? So I had that French head with the French woolen war. I go to the side. Again, I was too young to be a French prisoner of war too. By that time, I suffered already from dysentery, which is bad because you knew after that you're going to die. So I didn't want to tell my father about it, but something happens to you. You go through a transition. When you make a move like this, that your bowels going and up, and it really literally knocks the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And I had to go to relieve myself on the side. So I went on the back of a snowbank to relieve myself on the side of the road. I don't know what happened. I passed out. I didn't know what happened. I wake up. I see two soldiers from Russian soldiers who were part of Vlasov's army. Vlasov is WLASOFF, was a Ukrainian general that betrayed the Russians and went over to the German side. So now those two guys were running away from the Russians because they were afraid of retribution. Anyhow, I asked them for a piece of bread. So they gave me a piece of bread, but the bread was frozen and so hard I didn't have enough strength to bite into it. I remember like today. So I keep walking, and then by that time, the roads are crowded with German trucks going to and from the front.
You were away from your father at
I
this
was
time.
then away from my father.
Yeah.
I then was alone in German, in Germans, a lot of Germans going away, running away from the Russians towards the American
Yeah.
front. They didn't want to be caught by the Russians because they knew what they did to the Russians, that the Russians will revenge.
Yes.
So I walk, and as I walk, I see a horse-driven cattle, a cattle with the horses. In the front of the horse-driven sled, on a sled, there was a stoop in back of the cattle, and the smell of food you could, when you're starving like I was this unbelievable. In front, there was a German soldier, a Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht were different from the SS. They were the regular soldiers. So I went on top of the stoop. I climbed on top of the stoop and poked the French chef on the shoulder, and I told him, "Je suis monsieur, s'il vous plaît, un peu de pain. I am Jewish. Would you please give me a piece of bread, sir?" Well, he gave me a bowl of soup.
Wow.
With cheese and bread with melted cheese. I want to tell you, heaven never tasted better than that. The only bad feeling I had that I couldn't share it with my father.
Yeah. So you didn't know where your father was?
I didn't know anything. I was going to go to my mother now. I was heading towards my mother. Then I walked with the German woman, and she tells me all sorts of things about how the Jews caused the war and all that Hitler propaganda. And then as she talks, Russian planes come to shoot over the German convoys. We had to run aside into the field. So then I lost her, and I found another woman that was from the area. She told me where it is. So I asked her exactly where Neisse Neustadt is. So I didn't know that Neisse was a river. So she told me. So as I go towards Neisse Neustadt, I go into Neisse, I see there's a bridge, there's a sentry on the bridge. I was thinking, what the hell do I do now? I walk over to the sentry. He says, "Ausweis bitte." Identification, please. So I imitated a French accent. I says, "Ich nichts Ausweis." I told him the Russian planes. I was working for a peasant. The Russian planes were shooting, and we dispersed. And my boss had all my papers, and I got lost. I don't have them. He kept arguing back and forth. Finally, he says, "Mach dass du fortkommst," which means get the hell out of here. That I understood. I made a lot of stuff. I made believe I don't understand. I've understood, so I go to Neisse, and I had the address of my mother. So I was afraid to ask adults. I asked some kids, "Where's Klosterstraße 12?" Which means Monastery Street number 12. So I go up. He says, "Oben an der Kirche rechts," that by the church to the right. I go to the church to the right. I see the thing. There's that beautiful door. I go by the door. And now I'm scared. I got to act a certain way because I don't want to divulge my mother's identity. And I'm literally making in my pants, not knowing what to do. I'm shivering. I've never been, I was raised Orthodox. I was never there. I cracked the door open, nobody around. But I look at it, beautiful polished floor, a staircase with a great banister and all that. And to the left of me is that huge figure of Christ, the cross with the figure of Christ. I don't know what to do. Finally, I make sure that my feet are not, my shoes are not snowy and dirty. I go in behind the figure of Christ and look up at the banister and stay there for a while. Nothing is going on. And then all of a sudden, this woman comes down the stairs in a white outfit, nurse's outfit. She goes down the stairs with a tray. She goes into a room. I didn't know who she was.
She didn't see you.
Pardon me?
She did not see you.
She might have seen me. She thought I'm the driver. She thought I'm the driver of some, because people. She was going to give tea and cookies to people that came to pick up their parents to take away from the old age home deeper into Germany because the Russians were advancing. So she thought I'm their driver, chauffeur or something. She didn't know. I was dressed with that French thing. She didn't know. So she thought I'm the driver. So while she is there, I stay there and shiver in the meantime, not knowing, I'm afraid. So finally when she comes out, I say to her in German, Entschuldigen Sie mich bitte. Excuse me, please. Do you know a certain woman by the name of Barbara Siegmund? So she comes up to me, looks up. By that time I was a little taller than her. I grew, even I was in concentration camp. And she says to me, ja, ich bin das. Wer sind Sie denn eigentlich? I am the one. Who are you actually? So I says, Mama, du kennst mich nicht? In Yiddish. Mama, don't you recognize me?
Wow.
And then immediately, you have that animal instinct. I grab for the tea or cookies. She says, no, get out. I'll follow you later. Just get out and wait for me. I got out. And she took me to a monastery where my aunt was and a cousin of mine.
Oh, wow.
And which was agricultural. That's where I survived the war. The Russians came in. After the war, when we realized we went back to our town, Yavozhno.
At that time you were with your mother.
But that time with my mother, there was a whole story about our returning to our hometown. You will read it in the book.
Okay.
Okay? Because I'm just shortcutting it. When we realized, when I came back with my mother, I met a friend in Krakow who belonged to a Zionist organization. And he told me that he's leaving next week to go to a camp of a Zionist youth in Budapest, Hungary. Would I want to join him? I said yes, because this is where after all that suffering, where my quest for Zion came in. And I spoke to my mother and I explained to her that this is a quest I must reach. She agreed with me. But when she escorted me to Krakow to meet my friend, and to Krakow railroad station, and before I was going to the platform of rail, she started crying. She said, don't leave me, you're the only thing I have. I said, Mom, it came to a point where I couldn't do anything. So I said, look, maybe you could afford to lose a husband and 3 children. I don't want it to happen to me, and this is what I got to do. And I went. I felt very bad subsequently about the crude way in which this went.
Way it happened. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a dictate of the moment. I had to do it. I went and joined my friend. We went to Budapest. From there we went to Germany, where my mother was later in a displaced persons camp. And I had a chance to make amends with my mother about that event. It was fine. But my mother stayed in Germany. I went with my friend, and we were in a Zionist organization. And we went all through Europe. Again, this is a story that is in intimate detail in the book.
Okay.
And we went through Europe. Finally, we went through, we were hidden from the British Secret Service in a nut house in Marseille because we didn't want the British to know about us, because we were going to leave, and we did in fact leave on a boat from Sutz in Spain, just over the French border on the Mediterranean to go to Palestine. This was in February of 1947. We were intercepted by the British. They took me to Cyprus. I was in Cyprus from February till August, about 6 months, 7 months. In Cyprus, I was sworn in to the Haganah. It was very romantic. It was very exciting. And we also, in Cyprus, we crawled under the fences out, and we had exercises how to navigate in the dark and all this. And I joined the kibbutz. I was in kibbutz Negba. On my 18th birthday, I came to Palestine. I was in kibbutz Negba, and I fought there during the War of Liberation. I was in command of Emdat Hamesh, which is a position right on the Egyptian front, across the police station of Iraq el-Sudan. And after the war, I finally decided that the kibbutz is not for me. You know, Churchill once said, it's okay if you are at 18 and you're not a convinced fanatic about things, you got no heart. But if you are 40 and you're still a fanatic, then you got no brains.
Funny.
So I figured I better do something about it, because one of the things the kibbutz did not allow is to have your own decision about whether your kids, because the kibbutz had a restricted budget, and the community decides which kids should go to college or not. So I decided this isn't, you know, as they say in Yiddish, is nicht for me. It's not for me. Okay? So I worked as a carpenter, and I did construction work, and we built cow stables. We had a system. We formed a corporation with a system. We built cow stables overnight. You know, 2 days. We would pour it with concrete, dismantle it, and that's it. I did it for 2 years. I saved money to buy a lot, and then devaluation came in. My money wasn't worth a damn. In the meantime, my mother went to the United States, so I decided to join in the United States. That's how I came here.
Okay.
And then I went to college. Again, I didn't have an education or high school diploma to go to college, but I met somebody in the street. All this is detailed in the book.
Okay.
And then I was admitted to Rochester Institute of Technology, where I got a bachelor's degree in printing technology.
Good. Yeah.
And I married this young lady in 1958, in December 22. And that's why we are celebrating tomorrow, that anniversary, February 22, 1958.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
So,
Okay.
what did you think about it?
I think it's terrific.